ngimilay balauhen, uminoy. Hukbuon aliguyon, hakbat nan bahiking na, oy ipaldang nan bugan, uminoy. Idawat na nan mama, ya dawat bugan, ngimilay balauhen, uminoy. Imalipe magapit, nakdulin dinugahan, at bahay bayauhen, uminoy. Teya kayo tuwali, bugan ke aliguyon, ngimilay balauhen, uminoy. Opya ka ke magapit, nakdulin dinugahan, at bahay bayauhen, uminoy. Imalipe himbulan, yawaday mong tinuko, ngimilay balauhen, uminoy. Makatuntunod dahak, bugan ke aliguyon, anggian nakamtalaw, at bugu-buyo-buyo, uminoy. Ibugan bayauhe, nakdulin dinugahan, at bahay bayauhe, ngimilay balauhen, uminoy. Ibugan bayauhe, nakdulin dinugahan, at bahay bayauhe, ngimilay balauhen, uminoy. Pidit na'y tagakina, tagakin puluana, at bahay bayauhen, uminoy. Yanaya baluha, baluhan bayauhe, ngimilay balauhen, uminoy. Mulang naging baluha, ot pating tinugnaha, kingipayakan bugan, uminoy. Nahabyat aliguyon, anghian nakamtalaw, at bugu-buyo-buyo, uminoy. Tangtangad na kebugan, nakdulin dinugahan, at bahay bayauhen uminoy. An ungga kanabugan, nakdulin dinugahan, at bahay bayauhen uminoy. Man adiyak te te maid di aungna, ngimilay balauhen uminoy. Hukbuon aliguyon, hakbat nan bahiking na, oy ipaldang nan bugan uminoy. Idawat na nan mama, ya dawat bugan, ngimilay balauhen uminoy. Imali pe magapit, nakdulin dinugahan, at bahay bayauhen uminoy. Teya kayo tuwali, bugan ke aliguyon, ngimilay balauhen uminoy. Opya ka ke magapit, nakdulin dinugahan, at bahay bayauhen uminoy. Imali pe himbulan, yawaday mong tinuko, ngimilay balauhen uminoy. Makatuntunod dahak, bugan ke aliguyon, anggian nakamtalaw, at bugu-buyo-buyo uminoy.
Well, diba? So, this afternoon, we're joined by colleagues and students, of course, and special speakers. So just to give you like a check of who's in the room right now, we have a lot of students from the College of Science, I think, who are taking their Science 11 course. We have, of course, very good colleagues from the College of Science, College of Social Science, and hopefully some people from the College of Arts and Communication as well. So online, of course, as well, we have many people from our program here at the CSS. So we have people from the Bachelor of Arts in Social Sciences program. We've got some people from the Bachelor of Science in Management Economics, as well as Masters and PhD students from, I believe there's some people from MS Care, from MASBS and MA History, as well as our PhD in Indigenous Studies program. So yeah, welcome again, everyone. It's a great way to start the semester this way now, with a bit of interaction between us all. Okay, so let's explain first what's going to happen. Because this isn't our typical lecture, if you guys have questions later that you want to include as part of the conversation, we're going to have some time at the end of the prepared questions so that you can talk to our speakers as well. So you can ask anything, of course, related to their personal scholarship, their advocacies, or even questions about, more personal things like how did you get into that kind of work as a point of potential inspiration for us to find what we might be interested in as well, eventually. You can also ask about their advocacy platforms and their scholarship if you want to learn more about that. Okay, so how's it gonna run? From now until about 3 p.m., we're gonna have a conversation with Sir Marlon Martin, who we will introduce more later, and he's gonna tell us more about himself. And from about 3:15 to 4:30, we'll have Ma'am Oona Paredes, who will be interviewed by a different moderator. So yeah, by the way, my name is Jiraya Gray, your moderator for the first session of today. And our first conversation is actually going to be about oral tradition. Okay. Okay. So hello, sir. So let's just see. You just move it up. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So instead of it being like, there's a bio note that I'm going to read about you, we want it to be a bit more organic, and we want to hear from you. How do you want to introduce yourself to our colleagues and students here today, and our many viewers, both inside UP and outside? Yeah.
Where did the bio come? Wala akong ginawa. Anyway, I'm Marlon Martin. I'm from Ifugao. I'm a community worker. Ano pa ba? I work as a community volunteer. I work as a community researcher. Everything that has to do with community. But doesn't mean I'm just working in my community. So really and you're working at different levels of community. So hindi academic yan, dami-daming it's a very wide area of interest. Anyway, baka may guide questions ka kung muna.
Thank you so much, Doc. Well, do you want to introduce your work at the Save the Ifugao Terraces movement? Because that's, of course, the point of introduction in your poster. So do you want to talk about that a bit?
Our advocacy speaks for itself, the Ifugao Terraces movement. But it's not just about the structures. It's not just, there's more to the terraces than the structures and the structures lang. So we just use it as a symbol of everything about Ifugao. It was born in the year 2000 when the Philippine Rural Reconstruction Movement ended up all these projects in the Cordillera. So, ang iwan sila ng isang organization that would focus more on Ifugao culture, and that was the Save the Ifugao Terraces in SITMo. So it was basically manned by volunteers from all the World Heritage sites. And the World Heritage representative clusters. So you're familiar with your World Heritage sites? So 4 municipalities in Ifugao, no? So the official title is Rice Terraces of the Philippine Cordilleras. Yun ang pangalan sa UNESCO list. But we have 5 clusters in 4 municipalities. So in my hometown, we have Nagkadam in Banawe, there's 2, Batat in Bangaan. Mamle as the hometown would have like 12 barangays in the cluster. And if anyone's from Hunduan, all of Hunduan is the World Heritage Site. That's one municipality. So 4 municipalities in all in Ifugao province. That's the Rice Terraces of the Philippine Cordilleras. So our conservation work focused in those areas, in the early years of SITMo. And then, of course, in the course of our all this documentation, all this research, mostly funded by outside agencies. I say outside, kasi hindi ka nang pinupuntahan ng gobyerno dito, di ba? So most of your funding would be from international organizations. In the course of implementing our conservation activities, we learned a lot sa proseso ng this is not just about implementing projects. Introduction pa lang ba? Sabi ko siya, mag-moderate ka, be authentic. Ako nawawala ako. So yun. So we started. Kasi if you're implementing like a project, say funded by IFAD, funded by UNESCO, funded by ICOMOS, you tend to go with kung ano yung sinulat mo doon, kasi that's a contract mo. And most of the time, kung ano yung gusto ng mga funding agencies na to, yun ang susundan mo. Siguro masasabi natin when we were starting, hindi pa kami very familiar with the issues. Medyo ako tiga-poblasyon ako, so hindi ko alam yung issues ng mga tiga-Paredes. When I say tiga-poblasyon, pinag-aral ako ng mga nanay ko hanggang kolehiyo, kaya ang tanga-tanga ko sa kultura ko. So ganun ang reality sa amin, no? The more educated you are, chances are the more ignorant you become of your own culture. That's how our system is designed. Hindi pa nare-realize yan, hindi pa kayo nag-aaral. So, tingnan ito, the higher your educational attainment, the lower naman knowledge mo about your indigenous knowledge, about your own history, about your own cultures. Kahit pa kayong those belong to our so-called mainstream Filipinos.
No, but I want to ask about that actually, to continue to talk about it. Like, what was your interaction then with starting to become drawn to, these narratives of your culture that you were unfamiliar with? What was your personal experience coming into conservation work? And then later we'll talk about how oral history was a tool that allowed you to get in touch with that.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
Kasi tanga-tanga ko pala. So hindi ko alam yung issues ng ating sariling community. No? And I think it was, pag nag-aral ka, so wala kang alam sa kung ano nangyayari sa baba. Ang dami-dami mong ideas. Lalo na pag mga tiga-UPs, kagaling ng mga yan. So, you have all these bright ideas for your community na hindi mo alam yung basics kung bakit nagkakagaling yung community mo. And if you do all this community immersion thing, kaya ito yung most of the time would be hindi pa minimal pa lang ang paggamit ng red tagging noon pero kami mga unang subjects ng red tagging na yan. We were implementing a government project, imagine. We were implementing a government project in a far-flung barangay. So sinarang kami ng mga pulis, may mga kasama pang mga sundalo, tapos tatanungin sa amin kung anong ginagawa namin doon. Sabi ko, anong ginagawa niyo dito? Hindi naman kayo Ifugao. We were implementing a government project. Kasi baka may mga pugad dito ng mga NPA. Sabi, hindi, pugad ito ng mga Ifugao. Mga Ifugao natin nandito eh. So, and then when you ask the people in that village kung wala di bang nandito yung mga yan, itong mga, these are outsiders, no? These soldiers are from outside na, no? And then, sabi na, pati yung mga NPA palaging nandyan. So, okay. And all these NPAs, there are no Ifugao NPAs in that area. Kasi pag may mga Ifugao na NPA, nasa labas din ng Ifugao yung mga yan. So, both of these opposing forces na nagpupunta sa village na yun are outsiders. So, natiterrorize yung mga Ifugaos na nandun. And these are from the Kalanguya group. These are very peace-loving Ifugaos. So, tinanong ko yung sundalo, bakit? Nandito kami kasi tiga dito kami. Kayo, ba't kayo nandito? Matapang ako kasi sundalo yung tatay ko eh. So, and then marami silang ganyan na, sino ka? Mga ganun-ganun. Alam mo naman, gumamit ka rin. Bakit? Kapatid ko si General, hindi. Sure, they have no way of verifying kasi nandun kami. Walang internet. Takot lang nila. Sige po, sir. Sabi ko, kung gusto mo mag-escort, sumama ka. Samahan mo kami hanggang sa mga pinaggagawa na. And then, doon ko rin na hindi rin pala necessarily na you have to be so blunt pagdating sa mga ganitong proseso ng gobyerno. Kasi they're just following orders. They're soldiers, no? Pero ang danger doon is baka makita ka rin ng mga NPA. Ay, sympathizer ka ng mga sundalo. Mga ikaw rin. Dami-daming mga kwento against yung mga rin ng mga rebelde, no? So yun, well, you have to understand your enemy, di ba? Sabi ni Sun Tzu. So I understood that soldier na. And then, well, of course, I never considered the Reds as my friends. Kahit tiga-UP tayo, and of course, I did my own activism back in the days. I was never really sold out sa, sa armed struggle. So one time nabutan kami ng this group of from MPAs dun sa isang Terraces cluster na nakipagtanim kami dun sa mga farmers. Paano nila makasama nila kami? Sabi ko, hindi. Tiga saan kayo? Pili ko, tiga UP yata. Tiga Ifugao ako, pero nag-aaral ako sa UP. Ikaw, head to foot. Gusto niya akong maano. And of course, tiga UP, di ba? Ang katotohanan, pag ina-accuse tayo ng gobyerno na hugad ng mga. Pero siyempre mga commander yung mga. And then I had to explain to him kung bakit kami nandun. I had to talk to him about World Heritage Site, imagine. Kasi hindi nila alam yun, yung tinuturo sa school. So, nag-aral siya hanggang second year yata, Polisay. Una sa akin ng 2 years sa Diliman. Anyway, so all these interactions in the communities na you get to learn about through communism. You get to learn about a lot about government functions na nandun ka sa bundok. So imagine that. Hindi tinuro sa akin ng UP yung mga yun, pero natutunan ko rin sa bundok. So all these interactions with community members, with non-community members, doon mo magagather yung okay, so may mga issues pa lang mga ganito sa community namin. And then you get to use that when you're doing other work. Of course, ano ang relation nito sa conservation work? Anong relation nito sa community development? Ang dami, di ba? So there, all your daily experience as a community would actually make you think critically on, doon ka magkakaroon ng mag-perform ng sariling perspective, and then that's how you can actually come up with suggestions, on how to solve issues ng yung community. Unang-una, palabasin yung mga NPA at mga sundalo mo yun doon kasi sila ang issue. Of course, I suggested that ayaw nila. Ayaw ng mga sundalo at mga NPA na lumayas. But we established all this genial relationship with the soldiers and with the para lang. Pero nakakatakot yun, wag yung yun. Siyempre ginamit ko kasi sinakapitana. Friends nila lahat ng sundalo at mga NPA. So anyway, bakit ba tayo nandun?
I think, sir, okay, because you're talking. No, because it's really interesting, right? You talk about wanting to get into conservation work from different angles, but that's the reality of the field. And so those kinds of experiences are things we'd like to hear about as well. But, building on that, sir, how then did, like listening to these everyday interactions tie into, like oral tradition and how you took from those kinds of stories to build your work? Kasi that's where you're going now. That's what you're about to explain.
Oo pala.
Yeah.
Kasi that night when we were having this conversation with an old Baki, yung mga Baki na Ifugao ritualistic mga to. So their minds are full of, several volumes of history, ethnohistory, ano pa yung mga tawag mo sa so they're masters of custom law, spirituality, and they memorized like hundreds and hundreds of prayers na rin. Pag yung Mumbaki, pag nagcha-chant yan, hindi niya ini-invento. Set yan, kumbaga kahit parang sa misa, di ba? If you're Catholic, may reset si Father. Ganon si Mumbaki namin, meron din siya, pero hindi nakasulat. Si Father, ilang taon na siyang Father, binabasa pa rin niya yung page by page, di ba? Mumbaki namin, hindi, walang ganyan. Basta so we were talking to this old Mumbaki na nung gabi na yun. Tapos may mga sumasama kasi, parang may nag-Ilocano dun. Hindi naman Ilocano area. And then you would know, because if you're in Ifugao, unlike the other Cordillera areas, minimal yung paggamit namin ng Ilocano dun. If you get Mountain Province, and most of Benguet would be using Ilocano as our Cordillera brand of Ilocano. Pero sa Ifugao, hindi. Unless Ilocano ka. So yun, may mga ibang boses sa likod namin. Pitch dark, yung liwanag lang nanggagaling doon sa aming bonfire. So yun, doon nasalit itong mga NPA na to. So sabi, gusto niya sumama sa ano, kasi nakakatakot naman, nandiyan kayo sa likod. Diba? Or ganun din. So anyway, so nakilala ko itong commander na to. Like, dahil kindred spirit kasi tiga-UP siya. Magkaibang landa. Sabi ko, nasa community orbit ako, baka gusto mong sumama sa amin. Hindi kita ibibisito. So anyway, doon din siya, nagsimula din siya magtanong doon sa Mubaki. Yung mga tanong niya na, ano, imagine, imbes na hindi politika, yung siguro sa tanong ko sa kanya, palagi mo bang ginagawa to? No, this is anthropological. This is ethnographic. Hindi siya politika. So, anong pakiramdam mo na? Hindi ako nga, no? Hindi nga. Parang ngayon nga lang ako nga usap na, about culture. So, huwag na tayo pumunta sa politika kasi hindi tayo matatapos. Hindi mo ako matatalo po sa ako. So, and there. And then marami siyang bright idea. Siyempre, tiga-UP yan, so bright. Dami niyang sinabi na, ano. And that's an outsider's perspective. And that's community worker's perspective. Ibang level ng community worker. Kasi yung mga to talaga, mga community workers talaga yung mga yan, kahit yung mga sundalo na yan, diba, to show parang mas ma-appreciate ka ng taong bayan, tumutulong ka sa kanila, parehas lang taktika ng mga NPA at mga sundalo. So pag ako yung tiga village, kailangan namin tulong niyo, commander. Work. Ganun din kayo sa kapila. Effective yan.
Pwede ko magtanong about that, like, yung mga kwento na narinig niyo on that night. When you talk about like oral tradition, could you tell us a story? What did you hear on those nights, and how did they become impactful in your own contribution?
The first time we had this project on hindi ako yung team leader na the Hudhud. The Hudhud chants of the Ifugao. Hudhud chant, the Tuwali Ifugaos, no, Didlea. Hindi lahat ng Ifugao may Hudhud. So there are several groups of Ifugaos. So, huwag kayong magtatanong ng, ano yung hudhud niyo sa Mayuyaw, Ma'am Lea? Kasi iba yung hudhud na sinasabi ng NCCLT. So, ako talaga, I've been hearing this hudhud ng mga bata pa. Kami hanggang sa ano, but I never really learned the story. Kasi hindi naman yung tinuturo sa school. So the only time na makikinig ka ng malalaman mo yung ano yun, bits and pieces, is when, nagpipento yung, they're chanting, tapos pag nakita ng matatanda na may mga bata, sabi niyo, this is the part where, Bugan is going to wet aliguin, mga ganun. Pero bits and pieces, so never na nabuo sa akin yung buong kwento ng hudhud na yan. That's only when we were doing the research. Nalaman ko yung buong kasi ilang gabi yun. But if they're chanting the hudhud, abot yan from they start like early in the morning, abot ng gabi. Pero marami kasing commercial breaks yung mga matatanda na yun. Pag may iniinom yan. So, biglang sisingitan ng ibang kanta. Sabi, hindi naman pala days yung hudhud na yun. Actually, they can do it in a few hours kung diretso lang. Dami-dami pa kasing marites. So, nagbe-break din kasi yung mga nagchat-chat. So, umupo kami ng isang araw. Well, we started yung gabi na yun. Siguro hanggang mga alas 12 na. We were talking about the So, ganito yan. Magkaibigan, naging magkaribal, naging nag-asawa yung mga inasawa yung sister ng isa't isa. So, okay. So, ilan yung hudhud? Marami. So isang kwento lang yung pinento mo eh. So, ano yung hudhud ng ganito? Ganito lang, parehas din yan. So, yung parehas din yan, kung minsan kailangan mong i-decipher yung utak ng matatanda kasi they use words differently from how you use it. Nag-iiba yung context ng words every generation. So pag sinabi na ganun din yun, like yung Ifugao, pag sinabi na ganun din yun, don't get it like literally like ganun din yun. Papalitan mo lang yung ganito, hindi mo talaga magigets naman. So, oral culture pero kailangan mong isulat. Kasi hindi mo nagigets kasi nag-aaral ka eh. Pag sila yung nag-uusap, when elders, when they're the ones talking na, gets na gets nilang isa't isa. Pero kung ikaw naman, oh, parang bobo ko, hindi ko nagigets lagi sinasabi ng mga to. So, we sit down, we write it down. Sabi, okay, so paano mag-iba yan? And then, so it's like, so hoodoo is actually like a prayer, no? So yung purpose kung saan mo siya pinaperform is harvest ritual. Mag-shift ka in this part para maging harvest hoodoo siya. Or if you're doing it during a funeral, mag-shift ka ng ganito, you tweak the story a bit para maging, and then that's how I discovered the genius of the hoodoo. So yung mga yan, the mga stories of literally stories of the campfire, mga ganun. And then, hindi namin kaya yung aptitude ng mga natatanda sa pagmemorya. We never really memorize them. So aside from the hoodoo, which is an epic, when we were doing the research, we realized that we have hundreds of sacred stories, myths. Now, of course, I'm familiar with Greek mythology, diba? Yeah. Shakespeare. My gosh, pag narinig niyo yung story ng alim na yan, walang sinabi si Romeo and Juliet. Oo. And Ma'am Lea, recently ko lang nalaman yung story nito. Tapos only in 2012 that time. Kaya sa Ifugao kasi, pag kumakanta kami, meron kaming provincial song na ang awit ko ay alim at hudhud. Hindi naman kaya awit ba? So ano kayong alim na yun? Oh, mga bata pa kami, kinakanta namin yung awit ko ay alim at hudhud. I never had the time to ask my teachers kung ano yung alim. Epic yun. Ifugao epic, ganun lang. So finally, in 2012, I was able to sit down with the last of the alim chanters of Pasipulo. And sabi ko, sayang yung the story of the alim. Lalabas yung ng NCCA. Translate ko sa Tagalog para maintindihan. Ay, hindi pala sa English. Kasi syempre, it's in the old Ifugao languages. This is also strange for our mga language enthusiasts dyan, mga linguisticians dyan. So we have several languages in Ifugao. No? We have the Hapuan languages and the Ayangan languages. So dun sa Hapuan languages, you're familiar with Tuali. And then you have Kalamoya, you have Kelei, you have Yatuka. Doon sa Alim Chat, nandun yung apat na yun. And it goes smoothly yung paggamit ng mga words. Hindi lang grammar yung Of course, no one realized it nung mga past na nag-document ng alim na yun kasi they don't know the language, the Ifugao languages. Now, Professor Rosario de Rosario did the alim. And she mentioned that the alim is, it has different, it has Tuali terminologies, it has Kelei terminologies. Hindi sinabi na bakit nag-fuse yan. Then they never ask the question, paano ka nagsama-sama yung apat na magkakaibang salita na yun in one epic chant? Of course, that's the question I first asked nung sabi ko, nahilo kaya ta lolo, bakit iba-iba yung ginagamit? And of course, I have the advantage of, my mother is Kelei, Kalamoya, Yato. My dad is Tuali, Ayangan, Tuali and Ayangan. So, and I had the fortune of growing up with my grandparents, very much still alive, and they're very traditionalist. So I spoke the languages of my grandfathers, my grandmothers. In short, I speak all the languages of Ifugao, except for Mayuyaw pala. But I understand hindi mo ako pwedeng kwenta sa Mayuyaw mo niya. So, doon ko na this is very interesting. And then these are questions that people who educated people ask when some of our community members started documenting the alim. I don't know why they never raised this question, this linguistic question. Bakit nagkakasama ang magkakaibang language ng Ifugao dito sa epic chant na to? And this epic chant is not, you don't just perform that anywhere. It's a very highly ritualized epic chant. And also, one of my advantage is my grandmother is entitled to, when she dies, she would do that, they have to perform the alim chant. And I always use that. I need to learn the alim because if my grandmother dies, ano yan.
Sir, pwede ko magtanong, para sa non-Ifugao culture bearers like us, what is the alim about? Is there a way to like, is there a synopsis for this? What is it?
Alam mo yung mga epic chants
Yeah.
namin, mahaba hanggang 1 hour. 1 hour lang binigay yun. Hindi ko makikwento kasi hanggang bukas tayo dito.
Or yung theme?
Hindi. Anyway, ito. So, it's about love. Diba interesado kayo doon? May sex part siya, may violence siya. Politics, of course. This alim chant it's never performed when women are around or children. Bawal mga babae, bawal mga bata. Kala ko nun, another of those patriarchal. Hindi pala. Because among the Ifugaos, very speaking aming mga sexual taboo. So just the mention of parts of the woman's body, ano yan. And yet in the alim, mayroong ganun. Pero somehow, the alim actually doesn't say pag female breast, no? Hindi na sinasabing female breast. So kung hindi pa nakwento sa akin nung Mumbaki, kung anong ibig sabihin ng mga lines na yun, hindi ko talaga magigit, hindi ko maintindihan yung context niya. So there's this an entire paragraph. It's about
Relation.
no, it's not. It's about sex.
Okay.
And ang tawag doon sa yung hindi pwedeng palabas sa mga bata. Na ano. Pero it's not, when you hear the chanting, it's not about, it's not about the sex thing. It talks about the rain and the rock and the rice field. Pero ang ibig sabihin nun is they're making love. So of course, chanters would know that that's yun. So yun, bawal ang mga babae. Traditionally, bawal ang mga babae at mga bata pag they're performing the alim chant. So yun. So anyway, and the metaphors they use, yung measure ng tanong-talo ang Romeo and Juliet. Bakit ang mga palagi na lang tinuturo? Kasi syempre nga, ano bang tinuturo sa atin? Syempre. And then dito, si babae, patas lang hindi siya yung rescue ni Prince Charming. Sila lalaki nga yung umiyak dito eh. So sinabihan siya ni girl, wag kang ganyan. Bumalik ka sa inyo. Mag-move on ka. Makaka-move on din tayo, ganun yun. Kwento ng alim.
Modern day love story.
Pag natapos yung printing na yun, tagal-tagal na. Pwede ko yung pa-copy sa inyo actually. The entire story, advertisement. So one time na dito, there's an Ifugao cyberspace group, So I was in a bus or traveling to Manila. Tapos may nagtanong doon sa what's the alim? So somebody tagged me. Marlon Martin, ano daw yung alim? So, as a bus terminal sa Lagawe, I started telling the story. Pagdating ko sa Manila, meron pang last na And that was already what? 2 a.m. Pag nandun ka na sa Manila. Tapos, yung kapatid ko, nandun dun sa Pagbukas ko ng pinto, sabi niya, ba't yung kapatid ako siya Please, upo ka dyan. Tapusin mo yung the last part. Kasi doon siya, sabi ko doon sa bago ako bumaba ng bus, sabi ko, dito na yung bus, baba muna ako, magta-taxi pa ako. Tapusin ko na mamaya. Ang dami-dami palang sumusubaybay. So that's like from 7 p.m. sa Lagawe until 2 a.m. sa Manila. And then, walang nakakaalam sa Pwede kong i-twist yung story actually. So, well, anyway. So, tinapos ko yung, parang the short of the epic story. And then also this realization na, bakit nga ba, kasi hindi natin ginagamit yung mga to. Hindi naman bawal, di ba? Pero bakit hindi ginagamit? alam natin si, we're all familiar with Romeo and Juliet, we're all familiar with Cinderella, ganyan. Kaya tayo nagkakaroon ng mga gender disparities ngayon, kaya tayo mga gender gap na yan. Kaya syempre natutuwa, gusto niyo maging mga princess kayo. Doon pala sa mga sinunang mga kwento natin, Reyna na, of course not Reyna, pero pumapatas naman si girl. So yun ang problema with a very colonial orientation. Kasi sinasabi natin na hindi tayo colonial, anong tawag? Colonial mentality. Really. Yung mga Aesop's fable mo, it was not made for you. Para sa mga putihan, hindi para sa atin. So, and then, so yun, sinulat namin. So, kailangan na ng pang-publish. Siyempre, wala kaming pera, NGO kami. Lumapit yung NCCA. May pera daw sila. Okay. So, anong gagawin yun? Kailangan lang namin ng mga 500 copies. Siyempre, we'll publish it under NCCA. Sabi ko, no. Ipaano ko na lang. Print ko na lang sa coupon band, tapos ipa-xerox namin. Bakit? Natuto naman ako sa mga ibig sa UP na sa photocopy lang, di ba? Pwede namang matuto yung mga Ifugao sa alim na xerox copy lang. Ay, sayang naman. Ba't sayang? Kasi malalaman nila mo. Kasi yung, we have a transcript of the entire, line by line. I did the translation. Sorry, in English kasi medyo bitin sa Tagalog sa amin. Lalo na sa Ilocano. So there's the Ifugao version, the old Ifugao, English, and then contemporary Ifugao. Pero mas naiintindihan na mas marami sa amin yung kanyang English translation. Ang daming twist. Hindi tulad ng mga fairy tales na nakasanayan natin, alam mo na magiging ending. Magiging happy na naman si princess. So, dito, sad si na prince at princess. Yung mga apo nila ang naging happy. So, may alam din mga natin ng tragedy. Hindi inimbento ng mga Greek ang tragedy. Kasi may tragedy pala tayo. So, alimis it. Love story about tradition, custom law versus ibigay ko na nga yung main na nung alim na yan, nagmamahalan, which is rare, kasi arranged marriages Ifugao noon. Nagmamahalan sila, same family prestige. So walang kontra sa both kadamihan. Problema, hindi sila magkaano. Marriage in Ifugao is about reproduction. So sabi ng custom law, maghiwalay kayo. And the parents have to maghiwalay kayo. Even if they love each other so much.
Si boy, nag-happy para na to vent his anger. Si girl, umuwi na lang sa kanila. So you can feel the but they have to obey the law. So it's also about obeying the law. Diba? Law abider mga Ifugao. So, yun. And then, of course, there's this jostle of words. Nagkakataan sila na kung nagkatuluyan sana tayo, ganyan. So anyway, and then you can see, magandang topic sa gender issues kasi makikita mo kung paano parehas lang position ng babae at lalaki. About custom law and about obeying the law, about being filial, lahat. Andun yung values ng the values that Ifugao cherish. And aside from it's a very powerful magic myth. Magic myth yan. Kasi yung mga myths namin, sa sacred stories, we use it to give power to our prayers. So hindi yung tulad ng na magdadasal ka para pumasa ka sa exam. Ganun lang. May sacred story kasama ka dapat i-recite. So may mga level ng effectiveness ng mga sacred stories. So pag re-recite mo yung ali para pumasa ka ng exam, oo. So anyway, yun yung isang imagine that. And then we've lost a lot. So it's actually also a race against time. Paano ka, and then the more you do all these documentations, the more mo ma-realize na kulang pa, kailangan And then you need to involve more members of the community. When we were doing this 10 years ago, mga elders pa namin na, hindi namin kayo pinag-aral para yan yung mga pinagkagawa nyo. Kung ano ba? Ba't tayo nag-aral dito tayo sa rice field? Sabi nga nila mag-aral ka or else. Gusto mo maging farmer? Di ba? So yun, di ba? Nang tinuturo sa inyo, di ba? Ang lampahan nyo sa farmer. Gusto mong, ayaw mong mag-aral, magiging mumbaki ka na lang. So ano pala si mumbaki? Ano pala si farmer? Yung pinangangalandakan natin, yung rice terraces natin. Si farmer naman nag-maintain. Hindi niya kailangan yung PhD na yan. Hindi niya kailangan yung pagiging engineer na yan. But still, even now, no? Oh, nakag-eskwela, farmer ka garo. Parang walang dignidad sa pagiging farmer. You get to realize that in the communities, how we need to give back the respect na inaano natin sa mga our culture bearers, for us living in ancestral domain areas na hindi lang yung aming pagiging sorry.
Sige lang, sir. Sige lang po.
One of the viewers.
Sorry po.
So anyway, so ganun yun, dami-dami mong matututunan. And like yung parang kang nagbabasa ng political theories or mga the more you read, the more questions. Ganon din yun sa field. Ganon din yun sa community mo. And, you know, the thirst for knowledge is hindi yan natatapos. You just have to keep the passion ng gano'n ka kasi loser ka pag hindi mo tinapos ang isang research.
Sir, can you ask about kind of that theme? Like, in your experience with oral tradition and the oral tradition that you have conserved, what do you imagine are the ways that people from different disciplines, parang from, syempre yung iba, some people here are going to become biologists, some of them are going to be doctors, some of them are going to become historians. What do you think are the main points of how we can use these oral traditions in order to become more in touch with this knowledge from culture bearers?
Yeah.
So unlike you know when you're in working with the communities and you're a community member yourself. Okay, begin na lang. I'll just give an example. How when we were in the process of documenting, right? Itong mga documenting the Ifugao rice cycle. We stumbled upon the science behind this knowledge. So, syempre, we assume na pag nag-aaral ka, tapos nandyan si farmer. Sa atin yung from the academic perspective, tayo yung scientific, diba? Kasi we follow the scientific principles. Si farmer, ano lang yan, marami siyang superstitions na kasama, marami siyang maraming practices traditional practices na born out of trial and error, which is now being recognized as indigenous knowledge. So we never really look at indigenous knowledge as something important. Some people are looking into from the academic perspective. But now, of course, we're realizing that it's actually indigenous knowledge na dapat tingnan ng siyensa. So anyway, when we were documenting the Ifugao rice cycle, may mga parts, there are certain months of the year where they need to perform this ritual. And then, pag tinitingnan mo, at face value, parang, okay, those rituals, mga rituals na But you look deeper, yung mga prayers na recite, say, when they perform the tagtag, it's the driving away pest ritual. They do the dancing in the terraces, most of these are men who do the dancing. And then the prayers that they, ay, may science. May science pala doon. Siyempre wala nang na ano, kasi pag nag-recite naman si Mugwaki, most of the time, lasing siya. Diba? Hindi ka nakikinig sa lasing. And then, there's another one, blah, 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 it will take hours. Sinulat namin kung ano yung mga pinagsasabi. Just to check kung talaga nga ba may meaning ba yung mga pinagsasabi. So they tell us the story of the myth that they chant in this particular ritual. And and may mention siya lang ng what are the plants that are in bloom during this part of this month of the year. Ano yung mga insects na nagiging worms during that, So, well, from the perspective of biology, di ba? Ay, meron silang taxonomy. Alam nila kung ano yung mga yun. Meaning, pinag-aralan din nila kung ano yung cycle ng mga yan. So, alam nila na during this months of the year, na mabango yung rice, yan na kumakain ng mga yan. So, you perform this ritual, you gumamit ka ng this cocktail of herbs and na para pausukan yung rest of the ritual. The last people performing that are, I don't know if that time without the prayers, they're trying to eat in Minasipulo daw. Pero, ano daw, our father na lang daw yung prayer. Kasi wala na yung bakit nakakaalam. Yeah, di ba? Ginagawa ganun yung nangyari na. I think it's part of culture change. Even our hair tactics. Wala bang, instead of damong bakit being there, na si father. Pero kinakatay pa rin nila yung mga baboy sa ano ba. Dapat hindi nakasama yun para active na their hair cutting ceremony. So, yun. Even bakit sila nagtatabi this time of year? Na-observe nila kung which trees are in bloom. Eh, siyempre, wala naman kaming Gregorian calendar. So, the natural environment dictates everything. Kung anong dapat yung ginagawa ko, anong dapat yung gawin mo. So, and this is something that science should look into. Because this knowledge, ilang generation yan na ano pa ginagawa mo pag naglalaboratory ka? Observation, di ba? Kasi namin kasama pang experience yun. So, trial and error din, which is basically a scientific process din. Yung nga lang, kasi nga, yung orientation natin is, farmer, sabi niya, kung kailangan, let's do the laboratory experiment kasi mga scientist tayo. Nandyan na yan experiment ka pa dyan. So, yun, ganun yung and then, so yung role mo lang na parang mag-document ka lang ng mga sinasabi ng mga elders. Naging pala yan, pwedeng na multidisciplinary yung ang dami-daming pwedeng, even historical, another example, we're doing the archaeological project. So, when the archaeological data came out, so may mga year na yan, carbon dates. Tapos, ano bang profile, ano bang buri, yung ano mga pinagsusulat ni nakakabalo dun sa ko. Pwede bang sigtahan yan? Bowel na yan, kalabaw naman pala yan. Murig na yan, taga. Kung ano pang tinagaan, sabihin, do you have to keep the presentation? Keep it simple. So, yung mga this era. So na-dissect na yung lupa, archaeological report. So nandiyan na yun. And then, from the archaeological perspective, kung ano yung mga nangyari during that time, mga suspects ang nangyari. All these things, archaeology, like medicine, it's not an exact science. Estimate. So, sinabi niya doon there's this part na nagkaroon ng flood. Doon sa mababang layer yun. There's this part na there's a sudden increase in artifacts. And the community members were listening. Nandun yung isang bakit. Bumalik ka doon sa Yan yung the flat part, ano. So there was this time that this village was flooded for parang took hundreds of years. Kasi yung itsura nung sand, I think it was sabi nung bakit. Totoo yan kasi in our there's this myth that they recite. Nabanggit doon yung Great Flood. It's not the Great Flood in your Bible. Most cultures, di ba, Oona, would have this Great Flood. Maybe it happened in the past. These are historical records actually. Of course, you have to be discerning to separate fantasy from them. Pero dito sa Great Flood namin, nainis tong aming isang hunter god. Dinagay na yung kanyang pahiking na yun. Kaya sa amin yung pahiking. Ano na namang Ilocano Pacific. Dinagay doon in between the two mount, yung sa my gorge. So nagka-flat doon. Yeah, that's one of the flood stories, no? So, and then there's another flood story about the repeating of Ifugao. Paano nagkaroon ng yung magkapatid, mga pahilay ng mundo. Anyway. So, may memory pa ang community kung ano yung baka doon sa amin. So they started medyo nagka-interest ng mga archaeologists. Oh, so you have do you recall any story about the Great Flood? Nandiyan na, nagsasalita nito mga bakit about Great Floods. Then mabasa, dami pala namin stories about it. And then when they did the other, kasi sabi ng isang bakit isa lang ba yung flood sa archaeological report? Kasi meron pang sumunod dyan eh. And then they look closer, ay meron pa nga hindi nga lang masyadong obvious kasi very thick yung sediment layer ng di ba?
Magaling pa si bakit kasi alam niya na meron pang pangalawa. Another thing is about the artifacts na siyempre andyan naman yung mga technicalities of being an archaeologist. Anong tawag sa mga yun? May mga description sila sa mga passeries. So we did this community presentation where we brought all these artifacts doon sa isang classroom tos. Kasi binuo yan eh. And then, namin. And while the members of the community were going around, yung isang matanda, ingat na ingat kami na hawakan yung pero siya, binuhat niya gano'n. Biglang napaganon kami lahat. That's 1,200 years old. Ito, this is a burial jar. Ganun. Dati siyang kaldero pero ginawang burial jar. So, pag may napatay pag may pinanganak na patay, or a few days old lang, dito linalagay ng mga ninuno. Without being asked, very spontaneous yung nila gano'n. Kasi na archaeology, ang dami-dami pang explanation doon na possibly. Nakakaya sila kasi nakasulat na doon sa description ng kanilang Sabi ko, nakabado, tanggalin mo yun, nakakaya. Wrong info. Tapos, it was spontaneous. The elders started talking about how they did child burial, abutan pa nila during their time. Ano feeling ko naabutan ko rin yun. Meron pa yung mga ganyan. Although orokan na yung ginagamit, hindi na yung yeah, we buried them under the houses.
Plastic mga friends.
Tupperware yung mga. Orokan is a brand. Like Tupperware, pero sidewalk lang ng orokan. So anyway, yun. And then, kasi sabi ko nga nun, of course, how would the archaeologists know more about all these things kaysa sa amin eh? Kaya usually, pag nakikita namin yung mga sinusulat about the Ifugao sa mga libro, sa mga hindi naman namin nilang sinusulat, mas magaling pa sila sa amin. Mas magaling nga silang magsulat. Parang kasi kung minsan ma-realize mo, parang anong tingin nila sa'yo? Kasi Ifugao ka nung sa mundo, hindi ka nagbabasa naman. Hindi nila alam mas rin, hyper optics na rin kami. Then you get to watch all these things that they have to do, interpreting the Ifugao, kasi to preserve the culture of the Ifugaos. hindi na namin ma-preserve kayo pa. So, interpreting all these things that talks a lot about your history, about your culture. If there's someone who's going to do it, mauna yung mga tao mismong magmamayari nun, di ba? And then, and then we also realize in the collaboration, the importance of collaborating with scientists. Kasi there's, may sistema siya kumaga. Like, you know, hindi ako pupunta rin sa, ay, lolo, may mga surface research dyan sa may rights field. Mag-archaeology tayo.
Wala siyang complex, sabi ni archaeology. And then when you do the documentation, tinuruan din ako ni Iking yan, in spaces. Sa, how you conduct interviews na. Pupunta ako ng desk director. Lolo, ano na ulit yung ano? Marlon, ano ba? Hindi naman ganyan. No problem. Okay lang si Lolo nga. But you know, marami kang matututunan from people from different disciplines kung paano mo yan.
If I can like plug for you, right? Actually, in 2022, Dr. Acabado and Sir Marlon, they published a book at the University of Arizona Press. And that's a context for the stories you saw us earlier. And the book was called Indigenous Archaeology in the Philippines, Decolonizing Ifugao History. So I don't know if you guys want to look up more stories about this, yun yung mga hanap here. So,
yung local publications at Ateneo de Naga, that's cheaper. Parehas ang content natin.
yeah.
Kaiba lang ng cover.
Yeah, and then if it's Ateneo de Naga, maybe Mount Cloud would have it, right? As a local
Yeah,
English.
I think they have.
Yeah.
So 2,000 plus sa US version. Mas marami silang pera. Okay.
Fair. But that's fast. Like I don't even know how to wrap my own head around this. But okay, so let's look at some of the questions that kind of are related to what you were telling us about. From the ano naman, yung mga nag-register sa ating online parang Zoom. So of course we were saying kanina na we have to differentiate sometimes between what is fantasy, what is fantastic, and what is real, right? So parang ganun po yung tanong niya. As someone who has done research in the field, how have you tried to determine the reliability of certain information? What is the process that you personally have gone to determine that? Syempre kasi gano'n po makahaba, kunyari yung document nila, tapos pages and pages of like hundreds of pages. How do you go through that and look for, okay, ito, pwedeng totoo to, and we'll back it up with some archaeological records, and some of it is maybe more fantastic.
Okay. Some example, also the archaeological project. So itong, di ba, controversial findings ng archaeologists. 400 to 500 years old lang pala yung Terraces. It's not 2,000. Dami-dami natin nire-rewrite. Lalo na yung tourism na yun. So, when Professor Acabado called me up to inform me that the carbon base arrived, I'm going to open the envelope. So nung bubuksan na naman, well, since yun na nga, sabi, ay mali yan. Kasi diba meron din tayong bias of things old. Di ba? Parang, I think it would be greater kung older yung price Terraces. 2,000 years old, di ba? It's not tanda pa sa bawa. So anyway, so nung una, siyempre dami-dami, akala niyo ba, basta tinanggap ko na lang yun. Hindi nag-protest din ako. Pero of course, like yung kung ano paano mag-protest yung mga tour guides ng panahon ngayon. Ayaw nilang i-revise yung kanilang schools, no? Tagal nilang pinagsasabi na 2,000 tapos sasabihin na. Ang layo ng 2,000 sa 400. So the rice terraces are 2,000 years old. Hindi pa rin yung sinasabi lang. But meron sa in Kiaman, because the basis for the 400, sabihin natin 500 years old na rice terraces is related up to Old Kiaman village, purportedly the birthplace of Ifugao. So mga sacred stories niya from Mayuya to Banawe to Kiaman to Asubuli all go back to the Old Kiaman village. So Okay. Tingnan natin ng Kiangan. And Kiangan, as a village, appears in a lot of published literature in the early 1900s. Published sa mga American reports. So it's not just a mythical village. It was an actual village. And then when you go, sinurvey namin yun. It's now mainly rice fields na lahat yung ngayon. Pero medyo flat siya. Surface level, ang dami-daming pottery shards. So, inaara-araro lang mga pottery shards natin. So, sabi ng mga archaeologists, maybe if you go deeper, mas maraming dyan. So, anyway, fast forward, after how many years, washing carbon dates, mukhang 500 years old ang mga rice terraces. Kasi meron kaming myth telling the story about the construction of the first rice terraces. It was in that area. So, yun yung aming myth, sacred story. So, there was these two brothers na went hunting in the sky world. Namit nila yung mga sky world gods. So, sabi ng mga sky world gods, pinapaunan sila ng ba't nandito ang mga tiga? Kaya nga. So, anyway, and then binigyan sila ng kasi wala silang mga hotdog, binigyan sila ng rice. So, ito, rice. Pero ibang klaseng rice to dami niyang ritual. Saka you have to construct it in wet paddy fields. And then nung naamoy kasi ng magkapatid ng linuluto yung rice, bango ba? Hindi yan ganyan yung rice namin. And then they were trying to brag the gods pala kung pwede bigay sa kanila ng gods na yung rice na sabi nila. Ayaw namin ng ginto. We are from Kiyangan. Ang dami namin ginto. Kaya-bayabang talaga ng mga tiga-Kiyangan. Yung reputasyon ng mga tiga-Kiyangan sa Ifugao. Abang mga yun. Hindi pala, the gods were asking, this group of gods in the sky world were supposedly raw meat eaters. So nung linuto ng mga tiga-Kiyangan using fire, yung nahunt nila na yung rice na yun, sabi ng mga gods, ano yun? Ano yan? Ano yung apoy na yun? Ano yan? Apoy. Wala kayong apoy dito? Wala. Pwede yung turuan nyo kami how to use the fire technology. Sabi ng mga sabi ng mga tiga mga Ifugao. Anong babayan niyo? Hubong. They call it Ling O now. And it's now a Luzon, it's now Philippine symbol. Ifugao din. Inappropriate na ng buong Pilipinas yan. It's not also part of the yun ang unang primer ng mga skyward gods. Gusto niya ng marami ka. We are from Kiyangan. Dami namin dito doon. I will credit with you with the sacred stories. We're from Kiyangan. Ang dami namin sacred stories. So, ang dami namin na-offer yung mga skyward gods. Hanggang sa, anong gusto niyo? Hindi na kang bigyan ng message ng palay na bigas ng kinain natin. Medyo ayaw ng mga gods. This is a god, this is rice with the sky world. Kung kukunin nito, marami kayong ritual na need to perform all these rituals from planting, harvesting. Kaya namin gawin yan. That's actually the pact. So, binigay yung rice variety na yun, which is called now tinawon. So, tinuruan nila yung skyward gods paano kumuha ng apoy. So, inuwi nila sa kanila, sinabi doon, in that myth also na paano mo co-construct yung rice terraces, with the help of the gods, how you're going to perform the rituals in every stage of the rice. So, so you get a bountiful harvest. So, yung pinagkagawa ng Ifugaos for since yung start ng generation of ito. And then we have this written record of our family tree, Kiyangan, that started with the parents of these two brothers doon sa myth na yun. And if you count the number of generations from the first mortal parents hanggang sa generation ng mga grandparents namin, that's actually 25 generations. So anong sabi niya haba doon? 400 to 500. So ilang years ang 25 generations? So yung unang generation na yun, yung unang generation na yun, siyang nag-construct ng rice terraces. Kasi doon niya itatanim palay, binigyan ng mga skyward gods. Oh, it's 25 generations ago now. If you're going to compute that, that's between 400 to 500.
Which is by the archaeological record.
Yes, diba? So, and then ito, hindi rin namin na-realize naman. And we're very serious with our genealogy. Kasi hanggang ngayon, diba? That's how we win elections. So, di ba? So 25 generations of Ifugaos from the first brothers mentioned in the myth is basically 400 to 400, 500 years old, depending kung 20 or 25 years why kwenta mo ng isang generation. So, ng anthropology, di ba, yung 20 yata. So, exactamente. Di ba? Dati na parang nandyan yan. Kailangan pa natin ng archaeology. And so, of course, kung yung story lang yung nandun, ay ano mo, fantasy lang yan, di ba? And then, nagkaroon siya ng scientific basis, which is our bias, of course, because we're full of science, we're educated. So, titingnan mo, swak na swak. We never looked into this detail, habang sa archaeological record na. So, this archaeological data. So marami pa. There will be a lot of revelations that combine all these different disciplines with what is already there in the community, especially in our oral literature. So yan.
Thank you so much, sir. So now we actually have 10 more minutes left before we let these people go to the next class. So if you have questions you want to ask Sir Marlon, then this is the time to ask. Yun. Questions? 2 before we release you. Yeah. What courses are you guys from, by the way? Are you all from the College of Science? No? Raise of hands. Who's from the College of Science? No one? College of Social Science? You're all CSS students. Kayo ba yung answer? Yeah. So bakit wala kayong tanong? I'm sure they learned so much too. Yeah. Anyone with questions? From our online vaccine, is there anyone there? Yeah,
Meron po.
Okay, yeah. Could you tell us what the question is?
Ay, na-share ko po yung...
I will share. Ay, wait lang po. Kakalimutan ko yung Ayun, questions from Zoom. Okay, so we'll just answer one question like sir. Tapos those people that have to go to class will be released in about 5 minutes, right? Okay. So here's a question from Manuel Florence. Wait, let's see which one is easier to answer. That's the next one we'll ask after. Okay, so this one is from Mark Mashar. Maslar, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Sir, what tools, software, or professionals were employed to record the chants? Are there similar chant practices among the Ganda and Bukana to the east, if you're familiar with similarities?
I'm not familiar with the I've heard it, but I don't think it's similar. A lot of our recordings are already yeah, and also with you, and also with NCC, because we don't have the technology to archive it. Ang importante sa amin is ma-store natin for that. Even if you don't, because we need a lot of recordings, a lot of documentations now. Before the culture bearers died, so tatandang mga yun. And I think our predecessors also doing that in the past, since the 1980s yata. And then makikita mo ngayon sa mga police, especially with YouTube, ang mga records nito. So tinutuloy lang namin yun. Even if we cannot use it as in any other way aside from para ilang record natin. Ginagawa namin para. That's why we collaborate with other agencies kasi wala rin kami we don't have the capacity to store all these things.
But they asked, sir, who did you collaborate with in Baguio so that someone's interested in who approached?
Yung Baguio, yeah.
Sino po yung?
CSU. With located.
Okay.
Meron pa, even before.
Yeah.
So now because you have to say for
Yeah. So yeah, for other students, potential research things in the future, go to Museo and see what kinds of repositories are there. Besides textiles, we apparently also have oral history records or oral tradition. All right.
Native house din.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm of course the native house.
Kaligyangan yun. Sa mga documentation yan sa amin. No. So, sinabi lang ba tayo? Sila bata, gray, batag ba yan? Okay. It's not bata. Yeah.
Well, sir, any last things you want to say before we take a quick break?
When you do research especially if you're doing it in your communities, make it out of passion, may sarili kang passion sa pagkakaroon. All these concepts about indigeneity, because you're not part of an indigenous group, parang ano naman kayong gagawin namin sa akin, hindi naman kayo indigenous. Indigeneity in the Philippines is a legal construct. Pag Tagalog ka, indigenous Tagalog ka, di ba? Pag Ilocano ka, indigenous na Tagalog lang ang Ilocano. So of course, it gives advantage to these people recognized as indigenous dito sa Pilipinas, yung mga kasi daw marginalized ka. Kasi daw nag-disappear yung mga kultura namin. Ikayo nga, mas mabilis pang nag-disappear. Saan na yung tunay na mga practices of Tagalog, practices of Ilocanos, our mainstream Filipino brothers and sisters in Christ. Kaya kayo, marami yung mga Ilocano dito sa Pasinense. You have your own distinct, na hindi lang generic Filipino. And I think it's bago mawala lahat ng mga ito, I think we need to do our part in studying, documenting about our own culture. Mahirap sa simula, hindi mo alam sa kapagsisimula. Pero it will be worth it. And this sense of self-satisfaction. Sarili mo actually pinag-aaralan if you're doing that, you're working with your community. Multidisciplinary yan. Kung history major ka, or nasa econ ka, or nasa whatever, papasok sa heritage. And working with people here, it's also very important. Collaborating with the academic institutions. Sometimes you can, okay na rin. Bilisan mo, pero kung may makuha ka sa kanila, kunin mo na. Yun lang.
Thank you so much, sir. So round of applause for our guests. So if you guys would possibly go ahead, but if you want to stay, of course, it's another really great conversation from 5:30 to 4:30 between Ma'am Oona Paredes and Sir Joao Reginaldo. So yeah, thanks so much, and we'll see you after the break, hopefully. Yeah.
Nakdulin binugahan at bahay bayauhen, himilay balauhen, uminoy. bahay bayauhen, nimilay balauhen, uminoy. Pidik na'y tagakina, tagakin puluana, at bahay bayauhen, uminoy. Yanaya baluha, baluhan bayauhen, nimilay balauhen, uminoy. Mulang naging baluha, at pating tinugnaha, hingi payakan bugan, uminoy. Nahabyat aliguyon, anhi anak ang talaw, at bugu-buyo-buyo, uminoy. Tangtangad na kebugan, nakduling dinugahan, at bahay bayauhen, uminoy. An ungga kanabugan, nakduling dinugahan, at bahay bayauhen, uminoy. Man adiyak te ungga, te maiddi aungna, ngimilay balauhen, uminoy. Hukbuon aliguyon, hakbat nan bahiking na, oy ipaldang nan bugan, uminoy. Idawat na nan mama, ya dawat bugan, ngimilay balauhen, uminoy. Imali pe magapit, nakduling dinugahan, at bahay bayauhen,
Yes po. Yes. We have 46.
46 by Zoom. Okay.
46. 47.
Okay. Again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our conversations in the social sciences. And my name is Joao. I'm the moderator for this second conversation. And we thank Mr. Marlon earlier for discussing about oral tradition, this advocacy works, community work, especially in Ifugao. And now we are joined by another scholar and someone who is specializing in indigenous studies. Okay, and for our participants who are joining us Zoom meeting, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon, and we warmly welcome you in this conversation. So this conversation is brought to us by the College of Social Sciences, University of the Philippines, Baguio. And this afternoon, I will be speaking to someone who has an outstanding and interesting background. And this is actually taken from her Twitter. Okay, so let me introduce our speaker for this, or our guest for this afternoon. So from being a faculty member of Southeast Asian Studies, a professor at the University of California in Los Angeles, abroad with the Nawan, gikan sa Medina, okay, sa Misamis Oriental, Northern Mindanao, and someone who loves bibingka, okay, and someone who works with and for the Higoonan Lumad and other indigenous people. So I will be speaking to none other than Professor Oona Paredes about her research, experiences of, views, and perspectives on the academic professions of history and anthropology, particularly the discipline of ethnohistory. So good afternoon. Oona.
Good afternoon, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here.
Okay, aside from the things that I have mentioned earlier, can you tell us something or another interesting thing about yourself, or you want to expound something?
Okay. First of all, I'm technologically challenged. And then, but the other thing is that I wanted on the record that the Vietnamese makes the best, most original bibingka in the Republic of the Philippines. Yeah, but aside from that, I mean, there's so much that you can do it, you know, with the policy.
Yeah.
Wala atang bata.
Actually, ano siya po, protest siya na hindi na extra.
Nakawal tayo dito.
But anyway, yeah, kidding aside. So yeah, while Keely is preparing the mic, so for our audience, just arrived in the AVR. Okay, welcome. Okay, so we have here a scholar, faculty member of the University of California in Los Angeles, a professor of Southeast Asian Studies, someone who loves to be back. Okay, again, I'm going to reiterate that. Then thirdly, abroad in the Nawan from Medina, Misamis Oriental, because siguro yung iba hindi nila alam kung nasa ng Misamis Oriental. So, nasa northern part siya ng Mindanao Island. And very importantly, I think, this scholar is focuses on Ifugao and other indigenous peoples in Philippines. So later on, we will know more about their works and what are some of the interesting findings or insights that we can share with us this after. Okay, we can pass it along to you. So, do you want to say something before we proceed to our conversation?
Yeah, to sort of try to put a connecting point between uh, Marlon's career and mine, because we talk about an oral tradition and also about tradition. And the last question that he was asked had to do with I guess sort of not only conflicts, but if there's differences between what you find in scientific research or traditional historical research and oral tradition. I mean, how do you deal with that? I wanted to add kanina na that's a very common thing to occur, but one thing to understand with study oral tradition, work with oral tradition, is that oral tradition deals with a completely different kind of reality, a different kind of a very different epistemology, a different approach to understanding the world and the past than traditional historiography or like Western historiography and scientific research. So in oral tradition, the emphasis, as I understand it, is about what the past means, not necessarily only what happened, not just the past. It's about sort of what is people's impression of what happened, which is important, what happened, but more importantly, what does it mean? So parang iba yung mga tanong na kanilang sinasagot or that they're attempting to answer oral traditions and sort of more Western approaches. Very, very different epistemology, different questions, then therefore different answers. They're never, even if they come up with different answers, it does not mean they're equal.
That's very interesting. Kasi in analyzing or criticizing oral tradition, I think what I understood from what we said is we need to ask the right question and we need to acknowledge that they are coming from a different epistemology, especially for us. I'm an outsider looking into an indigenous people or an ethnic minority group's culture. It's very important to recognize the difference in epistemology, how they view, how they see the world that we live in today. So going back to that oral tradition, I think isa sa mga bagay na kaiba sa disiplina ng ethnohistory is understanding the oral tradition. But before we go deeper into that, I would just want to ask kung paano ka napunta sa ethnohistory or cultural anthropologies? How did you, what interested you to pursue this kind of discipline?
Mahabang answer. But the short version is I was very interested originally in African studies as an undergraduate. And then through various processes, I started to realize that I didn't really know very much about my country and what my own people, my own home province. Nag-intern ako sa Cultural Survival Foundation, Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the States for one summer. And it's about indigenous peoples, indigenous rights around the world. Tapos nababasa ko yung mga reports about IPs in the Philippines and I realized, wow, hindi ko to alam, So I started kind of digging more into that. So that's how I got into the sort of very, very roughly the topic of IPs in the Philippines. And narrowing it down to the group that I work with now, the Oona, it really had to do with my favorite uncle was dying at the time that I was starting research originally sa Tivoli area sa South Cotabato. And he summoned me to his hospital bed and asked me, why are you working in South Cotabato? Na meron naman tayo said it in Bisaya, of course. And we had, meron naman tayong mga IP dito sa Misamis Oriental. And I had no idea. No idea. I was so ignorant. And it was that process that sort of brought me there. And I got to, the first community I went to, just parang nag-click lang kami. magkasundo kami. I think because they like my uncle, and so it had to do with that. So it is a sort of serendipity in that sense. Pero yung ethnohistory, naka-encounter ako ng oral traditions in a limited way during my field work, which is about ancestral domain, politics, land rights. And for my PhD, I wanted to do sort of more of the same, pero I had a small child then. I needed to try to retool my research, approach to research so that I could schedule it better. And what better way to do it than to look at archives where you can go na parang 9 to 5 office, yung pupunta kang archives, meron silang opening hours, uupo ka dun sa magbabasa ka and you can make copies. So it is more controlled. And that's how I got into the archive stuff. So again, it's more to do with life circumstances than any kind of deliberate plan on my part. So and I just basically made do with what I had. That's where I am now.
Yeah, the point which is a combination of both your fieldwork experience plus our archive. For our audience and for our students who are here, ethnohistory kasi is a very different subdiscipline of history because of its approach. Could you expand more on on this, aside from utilizing the documents, the written sources, plus the participant observation, trying to understand the oral tradition of the group, and also the non-written sources that you can incorporate with the documents. Can you tell us more about ethnohistory, because that's the theme for this conversation?
Yun nga pala. Yeah, well, I mean, my understanding of ethnohistory is just broadly that it's history, except you are open to incorporating non-traditional sources. Because Western historiography is very limited. It's very narrow, and it prioritizes the written word as if hindi ka magkakagulo sa interpretation or analysis if it's written down, which is absolutely not true. So to me, traditional historiography is just as problematic as incorporating oral traditions. Marami ring bias and everything. Just because it's written down doesn't mean it's better in any qualitative or quantitative way. Everything has a bias. Pero ethnohistory, yes, you can incorporate oral traditions, you can incorporate cultural understandings of the world, you can incorporate things like songs or visual arts or even archaeological and yung sa ating discussion kahapon, I mentioned the example of this is historian of Southeast Asian studies in Barbara Watson, and she wants this study on oral history of Southeast Asia in the colonial period. And by oral, meaning what's heard, so it's AURAL, and and part of that process was going to these places physically and listening and trying to understand maybe what kind of sounds were there during a particular point in time, and even different times of the day, and trying to incorporate that into our understanding of what the experience was of of people on an everyday basis at that particular point in time. So may mga ganon, and it's you can really ethnohistory can many things, and I think that part of the reason why in ethno natin history, when it really should just be, in my opinion, histories, is that a lot of times we resort to these non-traditional sources because we're dealing with groups that are marginalized or minoritized or not considered important in terms of more traditional Western historiography, or wala silang masyadong written sources or any written sources at all. And so na-ethnicize sila, even though everyone is ethnic, and white people are ethnic. Pero na-ethnic natin yung history, say, parang, they're extinct. Pero I mean, if you look at it empirically, it's all history. It's all actually.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Pag-expound about ethnohistory and how is it different from the history, which is actually not really different because you're also employing the same criticisms, because in history, di ba, we employ external and internal criticism, not only in the documents, but also in oral traditions or non-written sources. And there are many kinds of non-written sources. Okay, so we must we should take note of that. So speaking of field work, and you mentioned about Ifugao, which is a community or a group of people in northern Mindanao. We prepared 5 pictures for you. Okay, and we want you to tell a story. Okay, dun sa mga picture na ipapakita natin this afternoon. Okay, so Kili, pwede bang ipakita yung mga picture? Okay, so this is the first one. So you mentioned that you are working with and for the Ifugao. So can you tell us about that picture? You're at the center of the picture. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm at the center, sure, and this was in 1992.
Bata mo pa dyan.
Maybe you were born yet. Yeah, I was black. So let's be in the middle. And with the kids, when this is from one of the first times I went the main Higaonan area where I work now is Balikian. And when I was there, all the kids were following me around, especially the little kids. And I think that their parents or the elders basically assigned them to protect, to make sure they didn't walk off, like fall into a ditch or something. So they kept following me around. So they were parang my posse.
Oh,
Yeah, they were my barkada. And they would, they would like, basta, they would just show me where things were. And I wanted to call attention to the fact that, so this was a long time ago. All of these people in the picture are all adults already, and many of them have their own children who are this age. So I'm that old. And but in the lower left, this one na naka-bone cut dyan na maliit.
that one, yeah.
Yeah, the one second from the left is Jerry Ubelno, who's my research assistant. So I don't know I don't think he's watching. But yeah, he finished college now. He's gonna be working for them. And but yeah, that's when I first met him. He was
That's very interesting. And I know these children like until now.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, me too. Yeah.
Okay, so next feature. Okay. This one is a publication. I read this when I was in my undergrad. Rivers of Memory and the Oceans of Difference in the Lumad World of Mindanao. For our audience, Ifugao is part of collective and contested word Lumad. So can you tell us more about this article? Or just a synopsis of the article?
I think this is one of my more deliberate attempts to start really dealing directly with oral traditions. And it was part of a workshop that I was invited to attend in Sogang University in Korea. And it was organized by Eric Talibokso at Cornell University History Department, and I can't remember the guy from the UK. But yeah, they organized this workshop. They wanted us to, a bunch of Southeast Asia people, to work to give papers about water. The theme was water in Southeast Asia. And I remember saying to Eric, my friend, I said, Eric, I don't work on water. He goes, yeah, you do. Just think about it. So it took me like 2 days and finally I realized, oh my gosh, ang dami palang water sa oral tradition. And napansin niya ako, hindi ko napansin. So I'm not very observant, obviously. Then so I came up with what became this paper. And it was very exciting for me because it pushed me out of my comfort zone. I was really able to kind of focus on this. But it came out of this workshop. Yeah.
That's very interesting. And if you want to, I think if our audience want to know more about this, they can access this free online. Yeah, you can download this article. So next feature. Okay, this one, Mindanao.
This was a conference in 2019 at the Was it SOAS?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah,
So,
SOAS in the UK. And there's a scholar there named Christina Juan, who's Filipino. And every year, except during the pandemic, they started organizing these um, very small conferences about, basically mostly places spots in the Philippines. So this is the Mindanao conference. There was one on like the Visayas Lake, more recent. And then it's in the summer, it's like 3 days or so. And so I became part of this conference, and it was about Mindanao, and what was so great about it, this is something to speak about organized conference, is that traditionally when you want to do something about Mindanao, you do issue a call, you invite people who deliberately work on Mindanao, mga Mindanao studies. But at this one, they just said Mindanao is the topic. And they didn't say you have to be somebody who's a Mindanao studies person. And so we had a lot of people who would never identify themselves as I'm a person who works. It was more, give us a paper that's about Mindanao, that talks about Mindanao. So maraming mga people I would never otherwise have met who work on like this Portuguese dialogues, maps, and then it was the most fascinating conference ever. And I actually learned stuff, which is rare. You're so immersed into the health side. Maraming bago na natutunan. But yeah, if you look out for the summer conferences, the Philippine Studies and then SOAS, every summer they have a new conference. It's very exciting.
I think this is the first time that I heard you speaking in Bisaya, right? Yeah, the introduction.
Oh, in the recording.
In the recording. But anyway, yeah. The next picture, please. Okay, now you're at the center.
In my the center again. Okay, so this was more recent. This was pre-pandemic, and this was when I was still working at National University of Singapore. I moved to UCLA 2019, right before the UK conference, and this was I think 2018 or 2017. And so this is from a large part of one community called Talaniso in the Baligian area. And they have their tribal council, they made it NGO. It's called Pahan. And that's their logo. And this was basically, I was leaving later this same day, and we just got that pictures of everyone. And yun lang, wala lang. We just wanted to post.
May mga nandyan pa dun sa isang picture.
Oh, some of the kids. Mm, the lady in the parang spotted top over there on the left. She's I think one of the kids in here. Let's see the top. Oh no, actually, because this is a slightly different group than the ones in the first picture. So this is naka-tira sila sa ridge. So it used to be another landslide sila. But then yung picture with the kids, that's in the valley. So those most of them still kind of more or less stayed down out there. Yeah. But they're all related to each other.
Oh,
Yeah, they're all relatives.
okay. So the last picture, please, which will be yeah. So this one is your groundbreaking book on Luman in Mindanao during the early colonial Mindanao. So the title is Among the Friends, and we want to, I think, to spend some time talking about this book and some of the important points that you raised in this book. So can you tell us about this book? Paano siya na-conceptualize?
Okay, so what do you want me to say about
Basically, paano siya, how did you come with this book, and ano yung mga methods that you use, and also the sources particularly, and the approaches, the perspective that you employ that is not found in other history books about Mindanao or about Cuba.
Okay, well, this one is, this came from my dissertation research from my PhD. So, bali, after I finished my PhD, my dissertation, I rewrote it. I rewrote it into this book, added some more stuff, had other people read it and give feedback. And so I added actually a major section of the chapter. There were a lot of errors that I corrected and things like that. But what I wanted to provide was very simple, um, a history of, but basically a colonial period history for uh, Lumads, for Spanish colonial period. Kasi ang ating common perception, not just IPs in general, but Lumads in particular, na wala silang nadaan ng um, colonial experience. And that's why they're different from us culturally. Now, that's very actually completely wrong. Um, and part of the reason why I sort of approached this topic the way I did was at the time that I was in grad school and beginning to formulate my dissertation research, there was this book that came out called Yanomami Warfare about the Amazon. It was by this guy whose name I cannot Ferguson, James Ferguson, I think. Anyway, Yanomami Warfare, and it was really interesting because the Yanomami, if you ever taken an anthropology class, in American anthropology, it's a classic textbook now called The Yanomami by Chagnon. And it's a very presentist type of book na parang, these sort of wild side of people who are, very savage and bagong contact pa lang in the late 20th century. But Ferguson kind of turned that around, Yanomami Warfare. Not that the work doesn't have any problems, but he basically was able to find some record of the Yanomami from like centuries previous and show na maraming contact and that the patterns of warfare that the Yanomami are known for in 20th and 21st century probably stemmed from colonial contact in the centuries before. That it's not their natural state to be in constant warfare, but that it's something that's a part of colonial contact. And the thing is, lumad areas ng Mindanao, especially around the 1800s, in the Spanish records or records of travelers who went through, they describe that area, central to eastern Mindanao, as a land that was so basically engaged in so much violence and revenge raiding that it's on the verge of depopulating itself. Okay, so a land filled with war, so this is kind of very warlike people. And so I started to think, okay, two things. One, what if that particular situation in the 1800s had to do, just like in the Yanomami case, had to do with colonial contact rather than the other way around. Now, they were warlike until there was colonial contact. Maybe it's the other way around, just like for the other thing was that if this guy could find enough material in archives to create a book that was this thick, it's like 400 pages or something, 350 sides. Ganun ka, about this group that being more even less contact, even if you look at it, then lumad. And so that's where, and sure enough, interesting. I made it Lumads instead of one particular group because, as we know, the naming conventions that we use now to describe particular Lumad populations are not necessarily the same as what they used to in the past. So just because you use one term now, it doesn't mean it's the same people before. So yun, the different agrupations, the different groupings that we have today are not necessarily the same as before. So I just relied on the Lumad as a generic term to refer to these people in the past. So but yeah, so that's sort of where it came from. I wanted to be able to say this is what happened to them or what they did during the colonial period, and I ended up finding really interesting.
That's very interesting because most of the time kasi pinapresent ng mga indigenous peoples like the Lumans, the Igorots, the Mangyans as untouched, di ba? Primitive, isolated people in the mountains, living in the mountains. But in this book, because I read this in one of my graduate classes, na may interaction din sila with the lowlanders, with the colonizers, and I think Professor Oona coined the word pericolonialism. So pericolonialism is a word that you can introduce. Can you tell us more about this term? What are some of the misconceptions that you've heard when scholars use this term or this concept?
Yeah, so okay, well, thank you for saying that. No, yeah, I was trying to figure out a way to describe the relationships that Lumats from the previous centuries had with colonial agents, in this case, missionaries, European missionaries. Kasi ang traditional view natin, especially in just anthropology in general, but also in indigenous studies, especially if you're more activist in indigenous rights, and I come from this tradition also, which is why I'm very familiar with it. Now, the idea of resistance is so deeply embedded in our understanding of indigenous studies, with people, and the relationship with colonial power and state power. Resistance is really, really important. And in many ways, we've used the idea of resistance as a way of giving them agency. Kasi di ba yung idea na they still have their own very distinct culture despite all the centuries, may resistance doon. That's why they resisted assimilation compared to our ancestors, for example, who did not resist. So, well, the association between resistance and indigenous minorities is very profound. But what I was seeing in the archival did not reflect this idea of resistance. In fact, ang nakikita ko, and part of this is influenced by my studies in Southeast Asian regional studies, and the episode of the theoretical sort of matrix associated with Southeast Asians, which says that Southeast Asians as a regional sort of cultural group, all of us, meron tayong regional tendency towards openness to the new, to the foreign. We're excited about new things, about innovation. Our natural tendency, our cultural tendency as Southeast Asians, meaning everyone from like Myanmar all the way to Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. It's all the ASEAN and Timor-Leste. That our inclination is to, when we meet some new people or encounter a new culture, our inclination is to embrace that and try to take things from that, adapt it to our own cultures, and make them useful for ourselves. So yun yung ating natural inclination, is sort of a very basic understanding of self. And when you look at the Philippines or in Mindanao as part of Southeast Asia rather than part of the Philippines, kasi back then, hindi pa siya part of the Philippines. Even if Spain claimed Mindanao was part of its colony, it was not under effective controls until the American. So I was trying to figure out how to talk about the interaction between missionaries and other colonial agents and the Lumad when it's not resistance. Hindi naman rin assimilation, hindi naman rin na they were overpowered and colonized. Hindi naman rin ganon. So how do you do that? So this term pericolonial came out because we're talking about the colonial Philippines. Yung Mindanao and other places outside of the major colonial centers like Southern Luzon, Cebu, for example, they're still parang technically part of the colony, and things that happened in the colony affected what was going on in these places, Mindanao. Pero hindi siya tunay na colonized in the way that we think about Manila or Pampanga. So I started to think, well, okay, it's on the parang outside. Pero when you say the periphery of the colony, immediately you have a judgment being entered there. That if you have place, if you call a place a periphery of something, it's away from the center. It then becomes reduced in terms of significance. It becomes parang salin pusa lang to history.
So
So I wanted to be able to center these places, but also acknowledge na hindi naman siya sa center. So I thought if they're on the perimeter, which tells you the location, but is not a judgment. Kasi periphery is a judgment. You're saying nandun lang siya sa periphery. But if it's the perimeter of the colony, it's still affected. So peri-colonial comes from perimeter and colony.
yeah. So hindi siya talaga periphery.
Yeah, hindi
Kasi
periphery.
if you are using periphery to a particular place, you have, as you said,
Yeah.
judgment.
Yeah, and it becomes the old center periphery argument. There's nothing wrong with that, and you don't get it. Really new. And it's the same. You treat the Lumans and other IPs as peripheral to the center of Philippine society. And it's the same trope, the same cycle. Perimeter. So any colonial, so I thought, okay, what does it mean then to be at the perimeter of a colony? And what kind of relationships can you form there? And so then the idea became, well, maybe the reason why we see these kinds of relationships between missionaries and IPs, between missionaries and Lumans in dito sila and Lumans in that particular point in time was because yung power relationship nila parang mas ano sila, they were kind of more even. Where you didn't have one side really overpowered the other. And there was not resistance as you think of it as resistance. Diba? Kasi you resist something if you're kind of being overpowered. Resistance is you're kind of fighting it, and there's like a challenge of power there that is and that's not what I saw reflected in archival record. That's not what I portrayed in the book. Which I tried to portray as a the book. So that's how it became, that's how I started to, that's how I came up with it, because I wanted to find a way to talk about it without going back to the idea of resistance. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can also apply this in other areas studies, not only in Mindanao, in northern Mindanao. You can apply this here in the Cordillera. If you are writing about the history of particular Igorot group that you're interested to study, you can apply peri-colonialism as a concept to explain the relationship. Well, the context of these groups are very different from the context of the Lubad. Again, as mentioned by Professor Oona, it's the archival material that will validate our assumptions about this particular group. Very interesting then, when I was reading the book, yung sinasabi ko, this is a very simplistic understanding of her book. Okay, that, the Lumats, especially the Cagayans, the K, the Cagayanon, were actually seeking protection from the missionaries because the Moros are actually invading and capturing the Cagayanos and other areas. Just
nakikita ko connect with that, and of course my bias is the missionaries, right? But yung nakita ko, merong resistance pero resistance or pagaya resisting moral power that attempts to control them. And so they befriended the missionaries and welcomed them in their community, thinking that if they are affiliated then with Spanish power, then they have a little bit more help to resist the Maranao incursion, or even having to be access to like that house. So many resistance, but not actors. In fact, there's a lot of examples of different Lumad groups, warriors from those groups teaming up with Spanish troops, Spanish and Pampanga troops, to go fight against the Moros. So, how do you say that? How do you say that that's resistance? That's not resistance. Hindi naman rin siya, total assimilation kasi they were still very distinct. And when they weren't happy with what was going on, they turned against the Spaniards. So they still had power. So very, very complicated.
but very interesting is the concept of agency. in this particular exam Professor Oona mentioned. Kasi minsan dinidepict natin mga indigenous people as just objects, or just participants in Philippine history. But we can see here that they also have agency to decide for themselves. And in this case, entering in a transaction with missionaries, as mentioned earlier, and it's a very interesting. So I think how about since you mentioned that I think this one about it of difference is a kind of ethnohistorical work. So you mentioned about archival documents. How about the field work or the oral traditions and other non-written sources? Were you able to use them?
Yeah, and of course that predated going to the archives that already had that. Yung oral traditions noon wasn't my focus. Now it is. So I'm doing something else completely now different. This came out 10 years ago. 10 years ago. And what I'm working on now is physically to do with oral traditions. Talk about that tomorrow. But I was exposed to it through the work of local historians, ordinary local historians working in sometimes not even in a university. Like there's some people working for local government, or in Bukidnon, who just decided to write this down, took it upon themselves to put things down, writing. And then also some scholars naman wanted to work with nomads, and then I found like dissertation at the University of San Carlos about the Ifugao, things like that, small things that are published by so-called. I mean, I know there's people who belittle local historians as if they're not doing important work. They're doing the most important, the core work here. And so people like me, even though I work at a fancy university, fancy degree at US University, I would not have been able to do any of this without the work of local historians. So I try to make a deliberate effort to seek out their work and cite it. So I mentioned this is the work of this person who's like, lives in the provincia and just wanted to write it down. And it's solid, it's primary source. So I was doing that, I relied on a lot of that. And then also some stuff that came out in interviews, like original field work on ancestral plants. And but also a big thing that made a really big difference to me, I think, was just having been in the field, being able to get to know, saw the pictures and all of that, and getting to kind of become friends with them and seeing their sense of humor and really being able to understand it in a really complete way. I can put in my head heart that they're complete and very complex human beings with sense of humor, agency, contradiction, and all of that. So I think that's why I wrote things that I did in the book portraying certain events. I think that's why I was able to, I was really concerned about making sure the characters were alive. Even though they're just sort of flat in terms of the archives, they sort of written about sort of flat characters. I had to see them as real people, with agency, just like the people that I met field work. Yeah. So yun for me was the quality.
Okay, so I think we also have to acknowledge the questions from our audience from the Zoom. But before we go to the questions from our Zoom participants, we would like to solicit questions from our audience in this room. You can ask questions about yeah, they are students from Indigenous Studies program. Yeah, okay.
So good afternoon, Professor. I've met a few of the Ifugao from Bukidnon, Masubo, last year, and they have approached the embassy, the New Zealand embassy, and their intention at that time was to understand whether there are practical tips on economic management that they can apply when they manage their ancestral. So I just like to know, like, in your research work, have you come across robust, exchange of information? I understand the difference, very different. But is there any community of practice for this stage that you see the potentiality of transferring that knowledge to more? Thank you.
That's a great question. And so speaking of Pokemon, I work with Nico in before and actually outside border of outside. Uh, Me personally, I haven't seen that uh, uh, to that extent yet, but that would be a great idea. Ang alam ko lang na ginagawa nila so far is when there's interactions between different Luman groups through, they just sort of organize their own sort of conferences and things like that. And so I know that they're meeting other Lumad leaders in Mindanao and possibly other IB leaders in the Philippines. Pero I do know this from my the communities that I know personally is that they always find it really useful to hear about what other IPs around the world are doing. Kasi nakaka-relate sila and they can see na, it's possible to do certain things and that there's really no, limit in terms of what's possible. So, I when I tell them about or they ask, what do IPs elsewhere do? So they're very interested. And I think that, I would love, I've mentioned it before, and if we ever find money, I would love to bring a group of people to either the US or to New Zealand. That would be great. Or to, actually Borneo would be really good. I say there's a lot of similarities, and it's very close also. So they won't need a visa. But yeah, it would be really fantastic to do that. It would be an adventure.
I don't know if this is related to what you share, but when I was with the parents, I toured early sa bag. So, namakolekta siya ng mga children's book na may translation ng English and then the indigenous language. And I told her, bakit? So, dadali niya daw sa mga sa Higaw, no? Communities para makita rin nila that they can also do that in their community. They can record their stories and come up with a children's book that they can use for IPED education.
Yeah, they have an IP education program there in Hingoog City, and it's run entirely by Higaw. And I know they're very interested in that. They talk explicitly about that. And interestingly enough, some of those people who are sort of heading the program now were small children when I first met them. Not the one guy, Gabriel Pinaling, he mentioned that yeah, he met me when he was like 7 or 8 years old, and he's like thinking, oh, I should do that. I should do that. And he's not in the too. But yeah, so we're gonna do that. We talked about books before and they're interested. It's not that they haven't thought of it on their own, but it seems so daunting. It seems like it's such an intimidating thing because if you come from a very sort of oral-based culture that is very not literary, oral tradition talaga sila before, and their language was only written down in the last few decades by missionaries. The idea of writing a book seems like, wow, that's too much, diba? But if you can see the very concrete examples, see it's a real thing, and it's just a book. So and so we talk about making this one book that we've been working on. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. Yung children's book, one of the things that they can make it and produce more books in their mother tongue.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think for the interest of time, we're going to solicit questions again from this group. We have questions. If none, I'm going to read some questions posted on the Zoom chat box. I think there are three related questions here. I'll just read. I think an advice from you regarding or concerning conducting research in indigenous community. There's a particular, a question here. Kalinaw, I think this is a Aluman language. I'm a student currently working on my a study on Ablaan reading, and he wants to know how he can use this. What advice can you give, particularly on the research methodologies and interpretation of the gathered data? And yeah, I think yun yung question.
Well, that's really broad though to answer. It depends on what your research questions. But I think it's really maybe just as general as
Yes.
um, you know, try to just close your mouth and just listen. And maybe also open your eyes. Listen na lang, watch. And sila ang expert. But of course, always ask permission to that process. Follow the ethical protocols. But yeah, it's a very generic question. And in research in general, people think that you usually walk into these enterprises thinking that the most important thing is the answer. In research, the answers are the most important thing, but that's not true actually. What you'll find in the end is the most important thing is the question. The question is everything because the answers will always keep evolving. Generation after generation, year after year, century after century, the answer to the same question will keep evolving. The more that you gather knowledge, the more that you perspective. So the question is the most important. So yung advice depends on that question.
How about tools? I mean, generally speaking, in conducting research in a particular indigenous community, what are some of the practical tools aside from listening, which is very important, and observation, and asking the right question? What are some important tools that you employ in your research with the Ifugao?
Rather than talking about specific methodological approaches or tools or software or something like that, I think maybe the most important, I don't know, the most important thing for me in terms of my own experience has been building, creating trust, maintaining that, creating, cultivating, nurturing relationships. That to me has been the most important, single most important thing in my work. And I think that I value that more than anything else that I could probably produce as a scholar. Ito yung aking relationships with them, which have evolved over a very long time. And I'll tell you why that's important, because when I first got to the first Ifugao community, I've been in other communities also, but in your main community and then offshoots of that community. Some of the people who've already moved to the city to go to college, they're part of that community. So they're part of the network with relationships that I have. When I first met them, we all got along really well. I think I said earlier that click lang talaga magkasundo kami. And I think because they gave me a lot of grace because of my. Pero I also wanted them to like. I was trying to be nice and everything. So magkasundo kami, we got each other's jokes, and they tolerated me really well. And I thought, wow, I really have rapport with this community. And then I did my MA, and then I was doing other things. And there was a time now, there was a very long gap between when I saw them last, saw them again. And in between, all sorts of stuff happened in my life, their lives. My first husband died, I had a baby and all this stuff. I went and saw them again. Maybe almost 10 years later. We kept in touch through Facebook, letters, but when I physically went back there, they were very different towards, and I was afraid that maybe they not remember me anymore or were cold, but instead it was actually warmer. And there was just one guy, I mentioned him in the preface of my book. that he just hated my guts when I met him. He's an elder and he's passed away. He just hated me. He couldn't stand being around me. Like I was so annoying. And every time I walk into, say, the same space that he was, he would just go, and you get up and leave. And when I arrived this next time after this long period, I walk in and he goes to kiss me, he goes to hug me and he calls me his basically like his niece or his daughter. And I was thinking, what's going on? Does he remember me? Maybe he's completely lost his mind. I thought he's really old, maybe he has dementia. They're like, no, he decided he likes. And what I realized was that the process of we got along and all that was fine. But the fact that I went back after all this time, then that changed the relationship, transformed it into something deeper. They knew that I'd not forgotten them, I didn't just use them for my degree. And not only that, they also started telling me more stuff. And I would say to them, well, you didn't tell me that, 10 years ago when I first interviewed you about this. And they're like, yeah, but now we trust. And so suddenly I was learning all this new stuff that I thought I already knew all that, the answers to these questions 10 years ago. May bago pa palang answer. There's more. And so I think that the more I spent time with them, the more these things kind of changed. The information I got, the quality was different. It's more, but stay on, and it's still evolving. It's still evolving. And so that relationship, I think, has been very, very educational for me and very instructive to myself as a scholar. That when we think of our sources of data, we look at, say, an archival record, a document, and we say, okay, this is all it says, and that's all it will always say. But when you're dealing with people as primary sources, every time you talk to them is going to be different. And the way that your relationship with them transforms over time is also going to yield different data. Maybe they might say the same words, but they're going to mean very different things. It's not only about you having a very different understanding of the same information, but also them maybe revealing of themselves what they. So yun siguro. Because all the other stuff you can learn from a book or on YouTube, how to do certain things methodologically or in a classroom. Pero yung hindi mo matutunan is the relationships that you're going to form.
That's very good from your experience. And I think for our audience, stay tuned kasi meron tayong short, decent snaps. If you want to stay, will be
Pero walang bibig ka.
going to buy. Okay, so siguro, well, nakita naman natin kung gaano ka-extensive, kung gaano ka-relational, at the same time, gaano ka-challenging yung paggawa ng history. Specifically, the history of a particular indigenous peoples. Na minsan, nakakadismaya because some other scholars will just say, oh, maliit lang naman yung grupong inaaral ko. So, parang how does that impact the national history? So, I think for the concluding or siguro before we end this session, ano yung mga encouragements mo sa mga tao gustong mag-pursue ng ethnohistory or and studies about indigenous peoples, given this kind of perspective from the national historians or national history writers. So in order for them to really continue the work that they started or they plan to do indigenous peoples.
I would say that I do, work on an obscure topic with an obscure group, obscure part of an obscure country. But I personally find it very exciting. But I've also found that over the years, there's people who have got many different things out of my work. That's one thing that you will learn as you go forward as scholars, publish and you present, you can't control how people are going to use the work. So that's why quality is important. Doing quality work and being honest about your work is very important because you cannot predict how your work is. Now that said, yung sinasabi ko, the questions are more important than answers. So when you formulate your questions, think about questions you think about. This thing that I want to study, how will it be, I guess, read or heard by people who don't care about, let's say, Lumad or IPs or Philippines, okay? And then that's how when you write things out, that's how you start to be able to think about how to make your work relevant to people who are not interested specifically in that obscure group, that obscure topic, in that obscure topic. Okay. So there's sort of that stuff. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is no matter how obscure your topic or the community seems to be, it doesn't mean that it can't be relevant in a larger way to other people who work in completely different part of the world, or maybe don't even work with ITs. Okay, so my work has been cited by people who work on South America to do with something different. My work has been cited by people working on peacemaking processes in South Asia because there was something I wrote na analysis na parang they found it relevant to what they were doing. Okay, so yung relevance ng work has to do with how you frame it after you put that, and that's also affected by what questions you're asking. So there's that. But the other part of your question has to do with your national history versus history of, let's say, of the minorities. And we had this debate yesterday about national history or national, crafting a sort of a nationalist history versus all these sort of smaller histories, seeing where regionalistic. I would say that, we should not just sort of surrender our historiography to theoretical nationalism. Because if you're in sa Philippines lang, if you're talking about the nation, history of the nation, na parang I think it's a fallacy to think that if you're focused on sort of regional or local, like ethno-history of particular indigenous minority groups, that somehow is leads to disunity or regionalism or kind of theoretical factionalism. It really doesn't. What it does is it can enrich our understanding of national history, and it makes it more inclusive. Because right now our national history, our nationalist history, excludes it excludes all the mono groups. It excludes that. It even excludes like Mindanao, So it makes national history more inclusive. But more than that, our understanding of the past should be more complex than our understanding the nation. Kasi yung iniisip natin the nation of the Philippines and Philippine history. You're kind of going at it in a very limited way because your end goal is to explain the creation of the Filipino nation. It's not necessarily to understand what happened in the past. See? It becomes an inevitability na ang endpoint natin, Philippine independence. But when all of that stuff was happening, even when the Tagalog Revolution was happening, we didn't know that would be the endpoint. We didn't know that we would be here. Okay? There were other revolutions happening at the same time. So, diba? I mean, those of you who know about that, you know that the history of the revolts against Spain were more complex than what were presented in nationalist history. Why do we exclude those things? Those things are really interesting. And actually, they say a lot more than how powerful they think, because it's not kind of like just one central group of people doing all the right things. We know that it's more complicated. And more than that, until only I think the end of the 1900s, beginning of the 20th century, no, sorry, end of the 1800s, beginning of the 20th century, um, the Philippines as we know it wasn't really as concrete. So again, repeating this quote that I told you earlier by Abinales, or also statements like is that the Philippine geobody, as we think of it today, was not fully realized until the beginning of the American period. Okay, so Spain claimed this whole archipelago; they had no control over it. They just claimed it on paper. It didn't mean that it was actually part of the colony. Mindanao was very colonial all throughout. Okay, place like Palawan, for example. What about Sulu Archipelago? That wasn't really part of the Spanish colony, right? Not politically. And so, we have to acknowledge those realities. It's not like Spain came in 1521, tapos the Philippines not that. That's not how it happened. And I think that the process of becoming is a lot more interesting than was presented in this, sort of very nationalist theoretical model, which is very, very limited and very exclusionary and very one-dimensional, right? And quite, boring. So, but then I'm Bisaya, so I'm kind of like pushing back. But yeah, so there's that. And so for me, I prefer to approach the colonial period, studying the Spanish colonial period from a very regional perspective, looking at Mindanao as part of Southeast Asia, looking at the Lumad as Southeast Asian, and looking at them as Southeast Asians instead of Filipinos, because they were not Filipinos until really post-independence. Diba? They didn't think of themselves as Filipinos. They were not aware. Jose Rizal meant nothing to them. Now they think they're Filipino. Now they're very invested in that Jose Rizal are national hero, all that. But before, they're like, are we? They didn't know they were part of the Philippines. They're like, really? Really? So yeah, so it's I think making it's more complicated makes it interesting. Also, I can go on.
Thank you very much, Professor Oona Paredes. And I think that we still have 10 minutes. You have your last words for this conversation.
Joking.
So
Any questions?
okay. So if there's no question from the audience, pwede ba natin bigyan ng round of applause? Okay, so thank you very much for attending, and for all our Zoom participants. Thank you for joining us kahit in person, and we would like to see you also tomorrow because Professor Oona will be lecturing about people of.
Yeah, this is about the book project we're doing now, collaborative research with I think.
Okay, so thank you very much. And again, this is Conversations in the Social Sciences. Anticipate more to come. And we have our snacks outside, so you can grab your coffee or I don't know kung anong pwede kainin. Basta punta kayo doon, get your share. So thank you very much and see you around. Yeah. Yeah, pwede tayong mag-picture para before you leave.